Julia Whelan is a writer, actor, and one of the premier audiobook narrators recording today. She has narrated over 400 audiobooks in all genres and has been repeatedly featured on AudioFile magazine's annual Best of lists. She was named Audible's Narrator of the Year in 2014 and is a Grammy-nominated audiobook director. Julia won the Audio Award for Best Female Narrator in 2019 for Educated by Tara Westover, and a Sovas Award for her performance of her own internationally best-selling novel, My Oxford Year. If you look at the list of Julia's accolades, it's obvious why she was presented with AudioFile magazine's Lifetime Achievement Golden Voice Award in 2020. Julia is also a certified tea sommelier. We're both a little starstruck today to be able to chat with the amazing Julia Whelan.
Welcome to the first 50 pages, Julia.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So I know that one of the questions that you get asked pretty regularly is how you got into the business of narrating audiobooks. And it is a fun story. And if you want to talk about that a little bit, we'd love to hear more about that. But our question, like this burning question that I have for you, is when it was that you fell in love with narrating audiobooks?
Very good question. And they go hand in hand. So the cute story is that one of my best friends in college, her mother was an audiobook producer and director for a company called Brilliance. And at our college graduation, she happened to come up to me and say, you know, you have an acting background? And I had just graduated with an English and creative writing degree. And she said, you might be well suited to this. Have you ever thought of doing audiobooks? And I hadn't listened to an audiobook. I didn't really even know what she was talking about. But when I graduated, I went back to Los Angeles, and the entertainment industry had changed so much, and I had been out of it for so long. I mean, 4 years is like an eon, that it was hard to get back into. And so I was in LA and, you know, tutoring to make ends meet and kind of twiddling my thumbs. And I finally emailed Laura and I said, what do I have to do this? And I put together a demo and I sent it to her, and she gave me 2 YA novels to do. And I loved it from the beginning. Like, it was one of those, just the very first page of the very first book that I did, I thought, this is for me. This is absolutely what I love. This is everything I love. This is the Venn diagram of performance and literature. And I loved it from the get.
And I think you really have to love it, because it sounds to me like it can be a very challenging profession. You've talked about, you know, when you're recording, it's dark, it's a small space, you're isolated. And I had just this vision in my head that, oh, it must be such a glamorous job. But I mean, you know,
sorry, I'm laughing. Sorry.
No, you know, because I'm, as a listener, you know, to audiobooks, you just imagine you in like this wonderful, I mean, I'm sure your studio is wonderful, but you know, it's just a different kind of space where you spend most of your day, you know, when you're recording.
It's very true. I always say that, first of all, you have to love books, because you have to love all kinds of books. And especially when you're starting out, when you're just happy to get a job and get an opportunity, you're not screening necessarily for the books that you're doing. And so you really just have to love books to start with. And then I think the thing that is difficult for a lot of actors who choose to do this is that it's a very isolating job. You don't have the feedback of a live audience. You don't have the collaboration with other actors. It's a very solitary thing. And so it attracts a unique individual who likes this process and this particular workflow and is creatively satisfied alone. And that can be difficult.
Yeah, that definitely kind of leads into the first question that I had for you. You know, that I'm really fascinated by the process and kind of the prep that goes into audiobook narration. I always like to research and kind of know the process of things. And I think that for listeners, this is kind of, you know, like pulling back the curtain to reveal, you know, some of the magic. Would you mind talking a little bit more about your process and maybe how it's evolved for you over the years?
Sure. The magic is work, as with most things. The magic is sleight of hand, and it's work disguised as magic. But the prep is a close read of the text. It starts there, right? So I will get a book, and my prep becomes reading the book, getting a sense of the author's voice, the tone, how I might want to, thinking about ways I'm going to interpret that tone to the listener. And then concretely, I keep two lists. One is a character list with all of the speaking characters in the book and any biographical information about them that's important and any vocal traits that they're given by the author. And then I'm keeping a word list, and these are words that I need to get pronunciations for. And sometimes they're, proper nouns, sometimes they're author invention, I just need to know how the author thinks saw this name being pronounced, especially in fantasy or something like that. Um, and then I go about my own research process of the words and also the characters and doing a deep dive on any accents I need to brush up on, anything like that. And then I'll usually take a stab at recording the first 5 or 10 pages, just to kind of test the theories that I've created in the prep process. And yeah, so that's where I think the English major skill set is activated most acutely, is in the research and prep phase.
Do you have any, like must haves in the studio or any like major no nos that you're like, no, don't do that if you're, wanting to kind of start on this process?
For new narrators,
Yeah.
any suggestions of what to avoid or what not to do?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, don't paint yourself into any corners. Like if you box yourself into a voice that you can't sustain for a 12-hour book or something, I think that's a big one. Be very conscious of what you can sustain without um harming yourself. So much of what we do is our body is our instrument. All of those cliches apply here, where we can't sacrifice our vocal health for the sake of a book. And this is like one of the very first things that I see young narrators run into is they go very low with their male voices, or they scream in a stage way, and they're just blowing out their instrument and making the long haul, because this is long haul voiceover. This is not like any other type of voiceover. You have to be conscious of what you are doing to your instrument for the sake of the book.
That's great advice.
Yeah, I think it definitely really helps, like, really make you understand how in depth and like how much it can, take out of you and like how much you have to put into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny for a job that requires you really don't move. You really should not be moving at all, but it does take a physical toll because of the sitting and the duration of what this job is. It's challenging. I always feel like ridiculous saying that, considering how many actual physical labor jobs there are, but it takes a toll. It takes a toll.
One of the things that is, to me, so impressive about your body of work is the range that you have for narrating. And when you browse the list of titles that you've narrated, even in the last few years, these are some of the most in-demand books. I know just in publishing, but especially we see that in our own library for the people coming in and making requests for things. Blockbuster books like The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna, The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes, and we've already mentioned Educated by Tara Westover, and two of my personal favorites, I have to mention them, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, and I just finished Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I loved both of those so much.
They're so good.
Are there characters? I know you've done over 400 audiobooks, right? And I'm not going to ask you to pick favorites. Certainly that's an impossible task with a list like that, But are there characters or stories that you have especially enjoyed narrating?
That's such a good question. I really, I mean, it kind of started for me. Well, actually, that's not true. I was going to say it started for me with Gone Girl, and I still carry Amy Elliott Dunn with me. I don't think that character goes away. I love that character so much. But even before that, I think I did a Jandy Nelson novel. It was maybe only my fourth book or something, and The Sky is Everywhere, it was called, and it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And that character, Lenny, stays with me a lot. And then over the years, I mean, I think most recently, sure, Addie LaRue was just so much fun. And it was also a challenge. I really took that book on as I wanted to try something different with the narration there. And I kind of set that as a goal that I was going to experiment with something. And so that book means a lot to me.
It worked.
Um,
It totally
oh,
worked. Your experiment
you.
worked. Like,
Thank
I
you.
just,
Good.
I didn't mean to interrupt you,
No,
but I
no,
just have
please.
to tell you that the play that you have between Addie and Luke, like the tension that you create in the story. Like, I read the book first, and then I decided to listen to the audiobook, and it just, you add so much. And it really is performance. You know, I think that's really, like you say, you are an actor, and that, you know, just really, it's probably one of, you know, my favorite character interplay in any audiobook that I've listened to. So that's just my moment
so
to tell
much.
you
She's
how
basically
much I
tried
loved it.
to pawn the audiobook off on every single person.
I am. You
in the
have to
library, like
listen
all
to
staff.
this.
She's like, so have you listened to this yet? She's like, I can give you a specific disc. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
As
If you
the
don't
person
listen
that
to the whole,
orders the audiobooks, I'm like, okay, can we not pass out individual discs to people? Like, kind of need to get this
That
back.
way
Like,
lies
Julia's
madness.
great,
Let's
but,
not do
like,
that.
You know, we need to get that back.
I'm like, just the scene. If you just listen to this scene, then you'll get an idea and you will totally fall in love with this one. But sorry.
Well, thank you. No, I really appreciate that. I really do. I think, you know, that book is so extraordinary. And that was one of those that when I got it, I just, well, first of all, I was very excited to do one of these books. And I had been following, you know, the gossip about the book for a long time. And it was on my radar. Um, and because I was going to read it anyway, regardless of whether I was narrating it. And when I read it, like within 10 pages, I just was like, oh, okay, this is going to be so much fun. And I collaborated with V on some of the performance choices because I wanted her blessing for what I was going to try to do with, and this is what I meant by an experiment. I was figuring out how we were going to have this woman who doesn't age, but has had 300 years of life experience that does something to someone's vocal traits, even if they're still technically the same age. And then dealing with how her accent has been softened over those centuries and over the different places that she's lived. And so there was this just kind of constant equation happening of where she was at in her own journey, where the book was at, how that was going to be communicated to the listener without being confusing. And she was so supportive of just saying, you know, honestly, whatever you want to do with it, which is very freeing.
you know, you mentioned Amy Elliott Dunham from Gone Girl, and you know, she's a very different character. Like, we don't want to like her, right? I mean, just, you know, having that opportunity to, you know, do a character like that, I just think it would be really fun.
It's so fun. I mean, I think, you know, look, you talk to any actor, like every actor loves playing psychopaths. They're just fun. And so, you know, that's still probably some of the best days I've ever had in the booth. And you know, when you add those up, like over the years that I've been doing this, certain books stand out just because the worlds were so fun. And that can be anything. That can be something like Addie LaRue. That can be something really fast paced and, you know, thrillery, or it can be something where it's just relationships that I love. Like doing Emily Henry's books are always a joy. Doing Evie Drake Starts Over with my friend Linda Holmes, like bringing a friend's book to life also is a lot of fun. There's so much joy that I'm just at this point, I'm just like so lucky that this is my job. And that's honestly how I feel about it. It can be challenging and it can be isolating. But it is nothing if not creatively fulfilling, and I get to live in books. I just don't know how. I thank Laura every day, my friend's mom, for seeing something in me that would be suited to this job that has become uh my life in a way that I couldn't imagine this happening.
You also, participate in some full cast recording or ensemble recording things too. Um, do you find that more challenging than doing, your individual narration, or do you like that energy? That
That
you know,
that's a good question. It's more logistically challenging, because you're coordinating, pronunciations or character voices or takes with other narrators. I wish it were more creatively satisfying, but most of these things are not done um, with the other narrator together in the room. So we're still just recording our own sections and then sending them off, and they're compiled later. So I love when something comes together, like Daisy Jones and the Six, something like that. That is fun because the finished product is fun, but the recording of it is not. I wish there were more. I wish there were more collaboration. Sometimes that happens. I've been able, like with some of Lauren Blakely's books, I've been able to sit in a studio with another narrator, and we're able to read lines back and forth, and that's obviously great. But those are few and far between.
So on your website, you link to a really interesting interview with Caroline Kitchener, sorry,
Hmm.
for The Lily, which, for those listeners that don't know, is a product of the Washington Post. It's a destination for stories central to the everyday lives of millennial women, where you talk about what makes an authoritative voice and how listeners tend to trust a man's speaking voice over a woman's. Do you think that the industry, or at least parts of the industry, are trying to, kind of shift the way we think about what makes an authoritative
I
voice?
think it is, and I think it's gotten better since I did that interview, since they did the profile. And we were kind of at the beginning of it then. And I see a concerted effort in our industry, producers that take this issue very seriously. The way that books were kind of revolutionized by the own voices movement, I feel that happening in audio finally, which is which is so necessary and so overdue. So I do think that's changing, and but I think at the end of the day, we are still limited to a certain extent by publishing and the fact that we still have most books that are written by men have more money behind them and more traction because they're usually nonfiction, which is the easier place to make money, which means that those books are going, because they have male authors, are generally going to be voiced by men. And it's a self-perpetuating issue that is really rooted in publishing, which is obviously very rooted in commerce and where people put their money. So I think we're doing the best we can in our corner of this industry, and I have seen a lot of change, and it's coming from a lot of work from a lot of different people trying to make this happen, and that's been very gratifying.
and you read for a company called Autumn, um, and they record articles for major magazines, the long form journalism from places like the New Yorker and the Atlantic. And you said you regularly read work by men. Um,
Yeah, so I think, and that's a good example of people who made a conscious decision early on. And I worked very closely with that company when it was developing, not just as a narrator, but also working in production there. And that was a conscious decision from the two founders from the very beginning, saying, we want to challenge how people think of authoritative voices. And so they started giving me articles that were the kind of big blockbuster, important journalism articles. And it's been interesting for me to see the response that I get when people reach out to me on social media or something, particularly men who are like, I hear now when I read journalism, I hear your voice in my head. And that's how we start changing things. Like that is how it starts moving. Um, so yeah, I think Autumn was really the vanguard of that.
that's pretty cool. Pretty cool to hear.
No, it's nice. And like I said, I don't think this wasn't an intentional thing. Like people just hadn't thought of it.
Yeah.
And the same way that when I was doing casting for Autumn, I would say, I have somebody like Dion Graham who is exceptional, but who gets pigeonholed so often. And so it's like if I can give Dion a piece that people wouldn't expect coming out of his, like I'm going to do that. I want him to do pieces that are against type. Um, but it requires that very constant, diligent, um, very mindful casting. And this is a process that moves very quickly, and people are overwhelmed. And, I don't fault human beings for not being able to make perfect decisions every time, but we have definitely made this a priority, and I see it happening.
And from some of the things I've looked at, just even like Twitter feeds and things like that, it really feels like there is a community of audio book narrators that you all really do support each other in a very cool way, which I think is really wonderful to see.
It's lovely. I have to say, like coming out of, Hollywood, where that's definitely not the norm.
Yeah.
Coming out of publishing also, where people can get competitive and weird. We don't really do that. And I think it's because we've had a lot of talks together, like in groups of narrators. We get together and we are like, why aren't we more competitive with each other? Like, why are we all? And part of it is because everyone is really, truly lovely. Everyone is very smart. We understand the challenges of this job. And it's also not a job where, unlike with on-camera acting, no one's making $20 million a book. Like the people at the top of their game are paying their bills. That's what we're talking about. So there's not a huge disparity between the rock stars of the industry and the people just starting out. So we can all really understand, we can still understand the struggle that everyone's going through. And it's such a supportive, wonderful community. And I wasn't expecting that. I didn't see that coming, but this is, whatever tribe narrators are, that's my tribe.
Kelsey and I have talked quite a bit about why we love audiobooks. And we both agree that good storytelling is transformative and helps us to experience the story in a profound and memorable way. Could you talk to us about how you are able to create these transformative moments in your storytelling?
Wow.
Sorry, kind of a loaded question.
Yeah, it's a loaded question. But, we understand as audiobook listeners, we've listened, both Kelsey and I have listened to a lot of audiobooks. Just having a great voice does not make you a great narrator.
This is true. Yes. Sure. So I think I'm coming at this from the two sides of my brain always. And one is the actor side of my brain, which says, how am I inhabiting these characters? Because you're inhabiting all of them. That's the difference in audio versus on camera or stage, right? I've got to give each character their due. So that sort of process of figuring out the characters and the relationships, that I really feel is the actor part of me activated. But I'm also coming at it from my writer sensibilities, which is what is the author trying to accomplish? How can I help them convey that to a listener who doesn't have the physical words in front of them necessarily? And what is their voice and what is their character, the voice of the book, and how can I serve that character? So to me, and that's why whenever someone, I think all of us narrators, we get a lot of emails from people being like, I've been told I have a great voice and I should be doing this. And it's always like, yeah, okay, but I can't tell somebody that you have a good voice that you're going to be suited to this job. It's so many more things. But to me, that's where like the intersection of those two sensibilities and two practices kind of come to bear on how do I, as you said, I'm a storyteller. That's really what I think this job is. And so all of those different components and the different ways of looking at the different components is how I put together the game plan for telling that particular story.
And I think in doing that, you really create that emotional investment in the story that I think we as listeners feel that, you can almost kind of tell if a narrator's like not super committed to what they're reading, or just like anybody that you hear, you're like, oh, like it just loses something. And
well, and I think that that's something about, we always tell actors, the first thing you learn in like acting class is like, you can't judge a character, right? You just have to, where there's no judgment here. You have to find something to love in the character. And as much as I think like that is oversimplifying whatever that task is of acting, but I do think that that applies to the books. Like you have to find something to love in the books that you record. And, sometimes a book may not be my personal taste. It's not something I would pick up if I were in a library, but I will find something to love about it. And again, as a writer, I understand like what went into this book. And so I'm going to be very sympathetic to the author's journey here. And so I think that I will find myself getting caught up in books and in the performance. And, and as you've been doing this, I've been doing this a while now, and you just learn like what works and what doesn't and how far is too far. And having that, always making it about the book. It's not really about you as the narrator. It's not about what your performance is. It's about how best to serve the book.
I think that, we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but your debut novel, My Oxford Year, which came out in 2018 from HarperCollins Publishing, was met with critical acclaim and international success. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about My Oxford Year?
Yeah, wow. It's been so long since I've had to like do the elevator pitch on this book. I'm trying to remember what I used to say. Okay, what I used to say is it is about a young woman who goes to Oxford on a Rhodes, and she has a political career. She's a political operative, and she's hired at the last minute to work on a presidential campaign. And she's giving herself this year in Oxford to experience life and poetry. And of course, she meets a man, and he is hiding a secret. Bum, bum, bum. It's a rom dramedy, I like to say. It is a love story that goes in unexpected places.
Yeah, Kelsey and I, being librarians, we read a lot of book reviews. And my personal opinion is that Kirkus tends to be sometimes the toughest, or maybe it's the most honest. I don't know. But, just as kind of a cool thing about this book that, their review of My Oxford Year said, Whelan has created a beautiful romantic story that focuses on big ideas, love, death, poetry, and what really matters in the end. So I don't think this is your typical, romantic story. I think there's a lot more depth to this story than what a typical romance reader might pick up. And and
that's why I'm always careful. No, but that's why I'm careful with, it was very lovely that very early on, like the very first kind of just blogger reviews I got were out of the romance community, and they were amazingly supportive, because as someone who has narrated a lot of romance, I never thought that this book fell into that category. And so I always feel I'm always on the side of like cautioning people, like, just don't expect too much from, like, it's going to be different than what you think it's going to be. But at the same time, I never want to put myself in the position of, apologizing for the book. But I definitely do feel that it's one of those books that just doesn't totally fall into any particular category.
And for those who are interested in audiobooks, you also narrated My Oxford Year.
I did.
And was that super challenging?
It was so challenging
and super rewarding. It just all the feelings about
it was I wish I could have enjoyed it more, but it was so difficult. And I will say that, like, objectively, the book is difficult. It's first person present, so everything is very immediate. We are very much in a character's head. There's kind of like no break. So it's a little bit relentless in the narration, which of course I didn't think about until I was reading it out loud. And then it's also, we have like one American in a group of, 13 Brits. And so trying to create distinct voices and characters for all of the characters that populate Ella's world was challenging. So it was challenging, like, on its face. It would have been a very challenging book to do regardless. But yeah, then being in there and trying to turn off my editorial brain as I was reading it, not wanting to rewrite every sentence was difficult. Difficult.
Well, I have to admit, I have not read my Oxford Year yet, but it is I'm buying the book because I want to. And actually, I'd love to listen to the audiobook, so we'll have to decide which version I'm going to go with. But
It's a tough call.
I'm leaning towards the audiobook.
So we mentioned in your introduction that you're a tea sommelier. How long, I guess, have you been interested in tea? I will admit I didn't know that was a thing that you could do.
It is a thing. Yeah. I've always loved tea. I didn't drink coffee until about 5 years ago. When I like hit 30 and was like, oh, I need caffeine.
Yeah, that's a fair statement.
I always loved tea. And then when I graduated from college, it occurred to me that I was at a high tea in, I think it was in Chicago, and I saw this guy kind of running around the tea room, like a maitre d', but seemed to be particularly involved with the tea and talking to people about the tea. And I pulled him aside and I said, "I'm sorry, what are you doing?" And he said, I'm a tea master. And I just, like, I didn't know, like you, I didn't know that was a thing. And so I went through a training course, and since then this has actually become more accessible. There are actual online classes. Like, I just did a touch-up class on blending recently, just to kind of refresh, because I haven't actively used it in a long time. But I did, when I was promoting my Oxford Year, I made a special blend for that book.
Oh.
It's called Staircase 8, but I never sold it. I never did any. It was just a kind of a giveaway promotional thing. But yeah, I love tea, and it's always kind of in the back of my head, wondering if there's something more to be done with it. But my plate's pretty full right now.
And I want to love tea, but I just, every time I try it, I don't know, I just have that moment.
This is my favorite game. No, this is my favorite game. Okay,
yeah.
What is it that you don't love about tea?
Oh, well, I don't want to like be insulting, but I feel like it's dirty water sometimes.
Understandable.
It doesn't have the flavor profile. So yeah, I someday, maybe
Are you a coffee drinker?
I am a coffee drinker, probably since
Do you drink your coffee with milk and sugar?
Sometimes. Depends on my mood. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, but
do you like a strong cup of coffee?
I do.
Okay. So I always tell people, see, this is where I start in. I always tell people that for the coffee drinkers who just like don't get tea because they think it's weak and they don't have much flavor, I would start with very flavorful teas, like a pu'er, like a lapsang shusong, which has like a very smoky campfire smell to it. You feel like you're on the trail. It's those types of teas that are kind of flavor and scent bombs are good gateways. That's all.
I'm taking notes. So
she is. Even I do love tea. I drink both tea and coffee, but Jen's taking notes for both of us. I'm like, I'm gonna have to try those now.
Well, thank you for the recommendation. I feel like that was definitely a bonus to this interview. Sure.
A little listener bonus.
Yeah. So as we're kind of wrapping up, are you able to share any upcoming projects that you'll be working on? I heard there's a new book coming soon.
What I can say is that there is another book in the works, and there will be news on that soon.
We will keep our eyes peeled for sure.
We'll just keep our listeners at the edge of their seats. Be like, you just have to keep an eye out. Yes.
But there is actually, I don't know. give me 1 second while I pause and look something up. I want to see if I can talk about this on the audio side of things.
Yeah, so here's a strange kind of connection. So we interviewed Victoria Schwab, and then I said I have to reach out to Julia Whelan because I was, and then I ended up, seeing all these books that you had narrated, and I was totally down the rabbit hole. And then I ended up picking up a book just because it was a new book in the library and had no understanding that there was a connection to you until after I was halfway into the book. But The People We Keep by Alison Larkin. So I read that one. I'm like, and she narrated this, and I really enjoyed that book. And of course she narrated this one too.
That book, so The People We Keep, is very special to me because actually Allie's first book, Stay, was a book I did early on in my career. And Allie and I became friends through that experience. And so I had read a couple of drafts of The People We Keep over the last 6 years or so, just kind of checking in with her. I knew how much this book meant to her. And I was there kind of watching her journey of trying to find a home for this book and other people who understood what it was and gave her notes when I could. And so it's a very personal thing to me. And I love that book so much and I feel like I kind of, was involved in the rearing of it. And so it's spectacular. And I'm so glad that people are finding it now. And it's one of those really gratifying publishing stories, which doesn't happen all that often. But when someone just gets the recognition and the accolades they deserve for something that they have tried to protect for as long as she has, and it's just great.
Yeah, I don't get real emotional often when I read books, but I had tears. April broke my heart.
It's such a fully formed character. The first paragraph of that book is like, this girl just jumps off the page.
She is going to stay with me for a while, for sure.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So good. So good. So one of the books that I have coming up, which I'm seeing is coming out on the 7th, and so next week, there's a never before published Simone de Beauvoir novel.
Oh.
Yeah, called Inseparable. And Gabor Zachman and I got to do it together. And it was a very personal story based on Simone's relationship with her best friend who died young. And so the book is this novel, which is really more like a novella length, and then has letters from the real Simone to her friend and back and forth at the end. And there's an amazing introduction also by Margaret Atwood that Gabor reads, and it's just spectacular.
Add it to the list, Kelsey.
Yeah.
Make sure we've got that one on order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our thanks to you, Julia, for joining us in conversation today. It has been a pleasure to chat with you. Yeah, we look forward to continuing to be listeners.
Thank you. I look forward to continuing to record. But this was just lovely, and you had some great questions. So thank you for having me.